everyone. First of all, let me thank IICAS for inviting me to moderate this session with some very well qualified, well-placed speakers on the topic before us, the ASEAN Economic Community, realizing gains and enhancing opportunities. I mean, the AEC, or the ASEAN Economic Community, indeed, like the ASEAN community, as we all know, is not the finished article. Our political leaders in ASEAN, latterly, in the run-in to the pronouncement of the ASEAN Economic Community, like to use the term, it is only a milestone. It is not the end of the journey. We in the business community would rather use the expression, it is unfinished business. It's unfinished business, and there's a lot more to be done towards achieving the benefits, the full benefits of an ASEAN economic community. First of all, not all of the 2015 blueprint, ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint, was achieved. Secondly, the ASEAN Economic Community 2025 blueprint identifies new targets as well. And these targets are rather more qualitative in nature, if you like. Things like competition policy, things like environmental protection, and so on and so forth. In our discussions, in my capacity as ASEAN Business Advisory Council Chair, we have insisted that unfinished business not be forgotten as we go for the long haul again, another 10 years before the ASEAN Economic Community 2025 objectives are achieved. And indeed, we received a commitment that primarily the non-tariff barriers that remain will be addressed in a more rigorous fashion. We received a commitment that the non-tariff barriers in four sectors, which we identified on the basis of closeness to people, because ASEAN leaders talk about people-centric ASEAN, that in four sectors, in 2016, in this year, the non-tariff barriers will be achieved, will be addressed as much and as most rigorously as possible so that we can report back at the end of this year what progress has been made in these four sectors. And these four sectors, as we had identified them, are the agribusiness and food sector, close to the people, of course, healthcare sector, e-commerce and retail, and logistics. Indeed, this month itself, there is going to be a meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the SEOM, the Senior Economic Officials Meeting of ASEAN, to discuss this particular issue and to look at forming working groups in these four sectors to address the unfinished business. Additionally, we managed to get incorporated in the 2025 document a commitment that there will be a better structured, a more rigorous, and therefore more effective officials' relationship with the private sector. At the moment, it is rather moribund. It's not focused enough. And so this is a second thing we hope to see happen at that meeting coming up this month, which are the areas in which private sector participation can be concretized and permanent so as to make a difference towards the achievement of the ASEAN economic community, the better fulfillment of the ASEAN economic community. And today, of course, our three panelists will reflect on this and other issues, looking back about realizing gains, and looking forward about expanding opportunities. And they are Sam Cheong, who is the Executive Director of the UOB Bank in Singapore, Mr. Robert Yap, who is also a colleague of mine on the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, apart from being Deputy Chairman and Executive Director of Y3 Technologies Singapore. You notice he is an IT man, and he's the only person without tie on this panel. Of course, Mr. Junichi Sasaki, who is a very important Japanese business leader, quite apart from being the CEO of ASEAN and Southwest Asia bloc for Itochu Corporation. They will speak for 12 minutes each. Perhaps it might be an idea for them to speak from the rostrum and then come back to sit down, and when we have a panel discussion, we will be seated more comfortably. And so let me first of all, therefore, call on Sam Cheong to say his few words. Please, Sam.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. It's really a privilege to be here in this regional forums this morning. As far as banker is concerned, I guess it's pretty heavy topics that we have discussed. So I'm quite sure these sessions will be a lot more lighter. I would like to share with you a bit more on, as far as UOB is concerned, how we actually capitalize on this rising opportunity as a result of AEC. But before that, I understand there are foreign participants. So it's good for me to not to do promotions for UOB, but at least give you some background about United Overseas Bank. We are an 80 years old bank, Singapore bank, and we have very extensive banking network in Southeast Asia particularly. And to be exact, we have about 484 branches across Southeast Asia. In the case of Indonesia, we have more than 200 branches. In Thailand, we have more than 150 over. And also, of course, we are the first 9 foreign banks to be given a license in Myanmar. Plus, we have a strong network in Malaysia, about 45 branches, and also in Vietnam. So this actually, the kind of network that we have in the entire Southeast Asia that make us kind of very unique and also very attractive to many of the foreign direct investment. Trying to make an entry into this, we always know, we call it highly diverse market. That I guess until now, a lot of the businesses are still facing challenges. So we can imagine with AEC implementations, there's still a long way to go, as we all have concluded after we have crossed the December 31st, 2015. So for us, our focus very much, how do we bring value to foreign direct investment, which we have spotted as far back as 2010. In fact, that was a time when I was still in Shanghai. That was winter 2010, when we start looking, my team started looking at the statistic. There was actually a very strong inflows of FDIs into Southeast Asia from 46 billion in 2009. In 2010 itself, it was like close to 100 billion US dollars. And that was the time we felt there is a growing interest again in Southeast Asia, where how can we capitalize? I think that was the very first step. And when we started conceptualizing the model, we realized that as far as UOB is concerned, we have very strong network, but we may not be able to, or at that point in time, fully integrated the business unit that we have and the platform to present a very efficient way of serving this foreign direct investment trend. We're pretty spot on. By 2011, October, we actually set up the Foreign Direct Investment Advisory Unit. And until now, whenever I give my cuts to partners, to friends overseas, they always question, why banks have a foreign direct investment? Isn't that the job of your government? So in fact, to some extent, we are like serving many countries in Southeast Asia. So we always say we are sovereign neutral because we serve investment into Singapore, we serve investment into Malaysia. And if you look at the FDI trend from 2009 to 2013, it has almost tripled from 46 billion to about 133 billion US dollar. That, at the same time, 2 years ago, Southeast Asia have surpassed China as a top recipients of FDIs in Asia. So to us, this is very significant, and this is a mega trend that we have spotted, and we felt in order to capitalize on it, we need to ensure that we have a very systematic way of supporting the FDI. In the past, many of the financial institutions, when they are engaging foreign direct investment, tendency is that they have their existing business unit, which is spread across from the large corporate to the small business, having their own way of serving FDI. But a lot of time, the focus is only still on banking. But if we ask business, the first thing that they need when they come into a new market, moving from home market to host market, banking is not the first requirement. The first requirement is always, how can I understand the opportunities? How can you provide me the market contact, the market intelligence? This is always very important, which we understand that by serving this need before the banking requirements of the FDIs, we are essentially putting the horse in front of the cart. And this is what we have launched this FDI concept in 2011. But of course, we know that businesses, they need beyond banking, just now I mentioned. So what we need to do next is really, how can we work with partners from various agencies, from government, investment, promotion investment agency, from specialist service provider, from different sectors, from logistics to accounting, tax, legal. How can we put all together? Essentially, we need to collaborate with external partners in order to deliver a seamless platform, because the banker itself cannot deliver that sort of end-to-end service. And that's where we started in 2011 to partner with Economic Development Board, being the first Singapore bank, to target global mid-sized Asians and global companies, of course, into Southeast Asia, into Singapore. And then we go one step beyond in 2012. We actually partners with the Chinese Council for Promotion of International Trade. That was back in 2012 when we had the discussions with them in Beijing. I still recall at the point in time when the Chinese government was asking us, can UOB help us in South Africa beyond Southeast Asia? Because that point in time, many of the Chinese companies, particularly the state-owned companies, are actually expanding into South Africa, acquiring resources and buying up extractive industry in those countries. But we felt that's not our playing field. We are very clear that our playing field is in Southeast Asia. So we agreed at the end of this to partner, or rather to work together to help Chinese expansion, particularly into Southeast Asia. So we became the first bank again in Southeast Asia to partner CCPIT in helping Chinese investment into the regions. So with this, subsequently, of course, with other government agencies, what we did is that we actually developed an ecosystem. And we realized it is very powerful, that when you have ecosystems of government agency in one country, including service provider, you essentially delivering a very powerful end-to-end service to foreign companies as they expand into a local market. This is something in the past, no banks actually have really done it in that way. So that actually encouraged us, as we see result, to expand beyond Singapore in 2013 to 8 other countries. And we have set up altogether 9 FDI centers from Mumbai, Shanghai, Vietnam, Hong Kong, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. So with this network, essentially, each one of them developed the ecosystem. And we're pretty spot on, as over the last 4 years I mentioned, the extremely strong FDI into regions, particularly from China, have actually helped us to drive our business in terms of helping this Chinese company to set up their base, first of all, in Singapore, and then extending into the region. And maybe I can spend a bit more time very quickly to look at how Chinese investment have been evolving, because this is, I think, over the coming years will be very crucial to many of us that is serving this group of investors in this region. I think when we started serving them back in 2011, 2012 in Singapore, many of them was just actually trying to understand about this region, setting up a trading office or hubs in Singapore, not really expanding into the regions. But increasingly, we are seeing, most recently, they're a lot more organized, they're a lot more confident. They're actually bringing a consortium or investor that actually comprises of industry players in various sectors in China as a consortium to even build industrial park in the region. So this is, to us, very similar to what the Taiwanese have done in the past, bringing the entire supply chain from Taiwan to China. So this trend may potentially, happens in Southeast Asia. In fact, we've already been seeing that. I think that is where the trend itself is really driving more of this Chinese, particularly the private-owned enterprises, more organized, more structured, and also not forgetting, they actually have very strong capitals, to take on this market. And of course, they have the home market, the excess capacities, which can help them to drive their investment, or rather to support their investment in Southeast Asia. So we move beyond by setting all these what we call receptacles in the 9 FDI centers or in Southeast Asia. We also focuses on markets like Europe, Japan, beyond China. Because Europe and Japan are also top investors in this part of the world, as we all know. So in Europe, how does UOB effectively connect Europe to Southeast Asia? What we did is really working again, once again with partners, financial institutions in countries whereby there are top investors in Southeast Asia. So we focus on 3 countries in Europe, essentially. That is in Germany, France, and UK. And in each of these markets, we work with the top banks that do not have a network in Southeast Asia, but their clients are actively expanding into Southeast Asia, and where they see value in UOB. Of course, on the other hand, they also felt that UOB would never be able to compete with them in their home market, so there's no threat. So the same principle is also applied in Japan when we work with many of the Japanese regional banks. As you know, that many of the Japanese regional banks, they do not have operations outside of Japan. At most, they have rep office. So they are unable to support very effectively their SME customers expanding into Southeast Asia. And that's where we see our complementary strength in working with them, in supporting these FDIs from Japan into Southeast Asia. So over the last 5 years, we are very fortunate, given the fact that we managed to ride our mega trend. We were able to help more than 700 global and Asian companies to set up in Southeast Asia. And in China, there's a saying, 时势造英雄, or 英雄造时势. I personally felt that it's always mega trend that will create a hero. So that is my takeaway for essentially the experience that we have over the last 5 years in driving these FDIs into, or supporting these FDIs into Southeast Asia. So I shall end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sam Cheong. Can I now call upon Robert Yap to say his few words? Robert?
First of all, my apologies that I came inappropriately dressed, wearing a shirt, jeans, and a jacket. I did get the wrong memo. And, next time I'll pay close attention in terms of the details of the memo. But thank you for, this occasion just to speak to you about, specifically in the area that I'm in right now, technology, and what it really entails in terms of looking forward. I'm not going to talk about the past. I'm really going to talk about the future and what technology is all about. And how it plays into ASEAN. A little bit of background about myself in here. I came actually from a very diverse background. Technology is not my main play in terms of skill sets. I was a CEO for PSA International. I ran the Asia Pacific region for about 5 years. And then I got poached basically by Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. I was the president for one of the subsidiaries called DFS Group. I ran a whole of operations for about 11 years. And then at the end of the year before, 2014, I decided that basically it was time for me to manage my own private equity and firm. And since then, I've invested in quite a number of companies in here. The companies I invested in, some of them would be e-commerce, fintech, for those of you familiar with it, renewable energy as well, solar energy. I've also basically invested into a company that is related to the area of e-commerce support as a whole. And then most recently, I'm joining the board of a healthcare company, which I can't announce just yet because it is one of the largest in the region. What I'd like to talk about in here is going to be captured within three areas: technology, supply chain, and specifically talent within ASEAN. On the technology space, I'm sure most of you are watching in here because ASEAN right now is becoming really a melting pot in terms of opportunities, growth, and most of you also know that within the next couple of years, it would be the largest economic bloc in the world, perhaps between 3 and 4. It is interesting, in the previous panel, I was just observing between China, Japan, and the US, the discussions that went on. I just want to say something to you. There is harmony in diversity because I flew Air China to Japan and I stayed in an American hotel. So anyway, on technology, the way that basically that we see technology heading within ASEAN right now is that there would be an explosion in terms of opportunities. And I captured into 5 thoughts in terms of where technology is heading within ASEAN. The first of which is this whole concept called big data. Big data is actually going to swamp a lot of corporations, a lot of governments, a lot of institutions right now that would see both structured and unstructured data coalescing right now in terms of intelligence that actually drives business in here. One of the things that I'm seeing right now, opportunity, is that more and more companies are now calling for predictive analytics. Analytics right now that builds upon business intelligence that's actually going to fuel the decision-making processes within the ASEAN countries right now that are actually going to basically be working together. Mobile commerce is also going to be a big play in here. When I talk about mobile commerce, notice I didn't use the word e-commerce because I really believe that the device that you have right now sitting with you, and I would say at least 100% of you would be carrying at least an iPhone or if not an Android. Show me your hand if you're carrying an iPhone. Well, there you go. Show me if you're carrying an Android. You are the minority. Okay, so the future is that mobile commerce is really going to basically pervade across all of ASEAN in here, doing both online and offline, and linking together with it payments and, most important of all, digital banking. I'm a firm believer that the traditional banking right now will, at some point, be influenced in terms of the opportunities that comes with digital banking. One of the companies I invested in right now, we already operate in 5 countries. We own a bank, and we're moving into the space of digital bank, and that space is extremely exciting. The third one is cloud services. Cloud services basically is that the traditional model in terms of rolling out IT solutions in the past has always been installed on your premise, run with the software, buy the software. The future right now is cloud services where you are really just buying the services and using it. And more companies like IBM, Amazon, Salesforce.com are rolling out solutions very rapidly, and that's changing the landscape in terms of affordability and reach to the market within ASEAN. The third is security. Fourth is security. Cybersecurity is going to be paramount. One of the things that we're looking at right now in terms of opportunity and the changing landscape within ASEAN is that more and more companies are very cognizant of the fact that security, both in terms of personal data, corporate data, and government data right now, is becoming more and more paramount in terms of control and knowing who your customer is. The last one is basically this area of technology is renewable and smart energy. I see a tremendous opportunity in that space in renewable and smart energy because most recently, Apple, in fact, announced that their data centers, their operations right now will be powered by solar energy. And they have made a very strong input right now in terms of changing the way they will be running their business for the future, and they would be using a lot of renewable energy right now within their landscape. The second topic that I see right now that's opportunity within ASEAN is supply chain. Supply chain, let me categorically say that a lot of people talk about it in terms of logistics, 3PL, 4PL. I think the future of supply chain really vests with smart cities. A lot of supply chain, a lot of solutions, a lot of services will be embroiled around the urbanization of a city, where more and more cities, as it becomes congested, as carbon footprint emissions becomes more and more increased, as optimization in terms of reach to customer becomes more and more pronounced, smart city, urban logistics becomes more and more a point that service providers right now have to really step into it. The second one is actually, once you have smart cities and smart grids and connectivity right now within those cities in here, it is all going to be connected in terms of intermodality. What do I mean by that? Intermodality basically means that the connection or transshipment between land, sea, and air. And the future that I see ASEAN right now as an opportunity would be that intermodality linking smart cities to the hubs right now that connects those intermodal areas in here will become more and more far-reaching and more extensive. The fourth is the Internet of Things. And I know the Internet of Things right now is an abused term, a lot of people use it, but within supply chain, I do believe that a lot of the things that we're going to see in the future would be SKUs and UPCs. The things that we tag to your product right now would have smart devices that tells us exactly where it came from, who it came from, timeliness in terms of delivery, where it has been. A lot of information right now that really profiles the product as it moves through the supply chain. And then it goes back into the first point that I have earlier on about security again. That smart chain, smart city supply chain right now will also be predicated on security that's going to basically allow a lot of cross-border transactions to be a whole lot more efficient. And so it comes back to the last point that I have, which I had 4 minutes ago, and it talks about talent. What do you do in the face that you've got this explosion in terms of opportunity for technology, smart cities, and supply chain? It boils down to talent. Interestingly enough, my daughter graduates in about 4 months' time. She's accepted a job offer in Accenture. Interesting. She is going to be based out of Singapore. She's going to be trained in Manila, and then she's going to be deployed into Thailand. ASEAN works. So one of the things that I really want to basically point out in here is that as the opportunities grow, there is basically a need right now for us to have more and more talent available within the ASEAN countries themselves. But also, there is a change in terms of specialization that's going to come across the face of the new professionals coming into the workforce within the next 5 to 10 years. I dare to suggest some of the key things that we need to see different in the pedagogy and the way that we would differ in terms of what we've done in the past and what we're going to do in the future would be the areas of critical thinking in the universities and tertiary education, creativity, innovation, services, and intuition as it lends itself in terms of the professional career of our students. I have been to China. I've been to their universities. I've seen the equivalent of polytechnics in China. It is amazing. The investments they put into those universities and the quality of people they churn out in here is simply astounding. And I think from ASEAN perspective in here, there's a lot for us to learn in terms of the opportunities that would avail to us as we lift up the game for the professionals, the young generations are going to step up to the plate and help us out. Lastly, I do think that there is a change in terms of the way that business is actually going to be evolving, particularly with R&D. I think the days of R&D in terms of having it in-house, using it basically as a cost center in here is over. The days of accelerators and incubators is here to stay. In Singapore today, 9 to 10% of the workforce are in accelerators and incubators. And this is one of the things that I would like to put and say across that even as we start energizing ourselves in terms of staying relevant in the 21st century, particularly ASEAN in here, I think the space for innovators, the space for incubators and accelerators is going to be a lot more pronounced than what we see here today existing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. Can I ask Sasaki-san, please, to say his few words? Sasaki.
Good morning, everyone. This is a great opportunity for me to introduce you our business integration way in Asia. Firstly, let me introduce our company, Itochu Corporation. We are one of the most well-known comprehensive trading companies in the world. We have 157 years histories. We have a trading business spanning around the globe and have established more than 350 branches, subsidiaries, and affiliates in 65 countries and regions around the world. We employ about 100,000 staff. We deal with almost everything, and our strongest point is in non-resource sector. In the last fiscal year, we reached the #1 trading company in the non-resource sector in Japan. Like the other Japanese corporation, we have been trying to maximize our presence in ASEAN countries. But since the last year, we have had one more reason. We put more focus on ASEAN. Last year, we entered into the strategic alliance with Chinese largest conglomerate, CITIC Limited, and one of Asia leading conglomerate Cholam Group Company Limited. And after that, we could say we have to commit it deeper to ASEAN as well as Asia market. Our policy is to aggressively promote synergies from the strategic alliance. And as a regional headquarters covering ASEAN, we have been eagerly pursuing any business opportunity for it, including attractive investment opportunities in this bloc. As CEO for ASEAN and Southwest Asia bloc, I have been spearheading an effort to promote synergy in ASEAN countries. Secondly, I would like to say my personal opinion about AEC. Congratulations on the AEC establishment first. As many people out there talk about it, the establishment of the AEC itself doesn't change business environment very much right now. The most important part of the AEC establishment lies in the fact that some of the measures under the AEC Blueprint 2015 have been implemented as provided or even earlier. I believe that enabled declaration of the AEC establishment at the end of the last year. Among the achievements under the AEC Blueprint 2015, tariff elimination is one of the biggest without any doubt. Tariff elimination ratio of 6 Asian countries other than Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, so-called CLMV, is 99.2%. Assuming CLMV implement tariff elimination as provided in the AEC Blueprint 2025, tariff elimination ratio in CLMV will become about 98% from 90% in 2018, when Singapore is a chair country of ASEAN coincidentally. This will make ASEAN more attractive area to do business in terms of manufacturing and trade in goods. Especially Vietnamese trade elimination, tariff elimination will give us many business chances. In contrast to the progress of the tariff elimination, we have not seen big progress in the other area, especially in elimination of non-tariff barriers. The service trade liberalization, the financial sector integration, and facilitation of skilled labor mobility. We have been aware of each Asian country has its own business area of keen interest for its own reason, including necessity to protect its domestic service providers. And it would be difficult for the member countries to reach an agreement and implement necessary regulatory reform in short period of time. We also have been aware that it takes us Asian country 25 years to reach the tariff elimination at the high level. So we are slightly skeptical if the measure in the Blueprint 2025 will be implemented within next 10 years. But at least we would like to see steady progress of the measure towards ASEAN as a single market and production base characterized by the free flow of goods, service, and investment, as well as free flow of capital and skills. We would like to see steady progress like this discussion on ASEAN single window and the implementation of the pilot project. In this regard, I would like Singapore to remain to be a runner of ASEAN integration. Lastly, let me talk about our strategic alliance with CITIC and CP. In 2014, July, we agreed to strategic alliance with Charoen-Pakapang Group. We obtained 25% share in CP Pokapang Corp. Limited, which is in food business and one of the few core companies of CP Group and listed in Hong Kong Stock Exchange. CP Group obtained about 4.9% of Itochu's corporation shares. CP Group has developed diversified business portfolio in over 20 countries worldwide, including Thailand, Vietnam, and China, and so on. It has been involved in a wide range of business, including food-related, retail, ICT, insurance, and financial business. In the last January, we developed our strategic alliance with CP Group into strategic cooperation among CITIC, CP, and us. As a part of the strategic cooperation, we obtained 20% share in CITIC together with CP Group through a joint venture company, which have the right to nominate one non-executive director and one independent non-executive director to the board of CITIC. CITIC is the largest conglomerate in China and has many industrial sectors of business, many of which are leading companies in the industry. We had already formed a strategic alliance with CITIC, which called for the joint development opportunity in the non-resource sector across the region. In the summer of 2014, and this former strategic alliance was involved into the three-party strategic cooperation. We have strengths in our capabilities in a wide variety of fields and have global supply and sales network and business development function. We have very strong business foundation in Japan. CP Group has strong local business foundation and presence throughout China and ASEAN countries, as well as overseas Chinese network throughout the world. CITIC has a strong business relationship with Chinese central and local government, as well as significant recognition and its brand name. We believe by combining each party's strengths, all of the three parties are able to have further access to the business opportunities for value creation and potential co-investment in China, Asia, as well as global market, and thus further develop business integration in ASEAN, China, Japan, and the world. We seek synergetic benefit in various areas of business with the optimum combination of CITIC having a strong financial service sector with an aim to diversify and strengthen its portfolio, and the CP Group and Itochu possessing strengths in non-resource business, especially in the consumer-related sector. In the last October, our first joint project is co-investment to start a cross-border e-commerce business in China with China Mobile and an investment company owned by Shanghai municipal government. I believe we can make synergy with three parties. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. We're doing very well for time. Well, you know, these businessmen, they are very quick, you know, breezy, snappy, and move fast, so we're all right. But they were also, ladies and gentlemen, very upbeat and bullish. And this is in contradistinction, really, perhaps, to the political analysts, you know, who are, you know, less bullish and upbeat than the businessmen are. This is not surprising, I suppose, is it? Because of all the so-called three pillars of the ASEAN community, it is the AEC which is the most real, however imperfect it may be. And businessmen see the opportunities that are opened up. And I mean, Robert Yap was talking particularly about e-commerce and logistics opportunities. And I mean, Sam was identifying the investment opportunities and the FDIs that were coming in droves. I mean, less than 5 years ago, the worry in ASEAN was that ASEAN might fall between the two stools of India and China insofar as FDIs were concerned. But lo and behold, ASEAN is now the main destination for FDIs among the three. And look, we can attribute quite a bit of that to the AEC, this program. Now, can I pull you back a bit, members of the panel? What are your frustrations? What are the problems that you're worried about? They may be political, they may be economic, they could be regulatory. What are your frustrations, your main frustrations about how things can be better, you know? Maybe we start with Robert Yap. I think I've heard some of you over there, Yap.
Sure, let me have a stab at it. I think one of the frustrations that we encounter is that, you know, as you are an emerging company and you are looking at acquisitions in the region, and specifically if you look at opportunities in terms of companies that you're trying to acquire, coming from a Singapore background where the whole process in terms of governance, disclosure, is a whole lot more evident. When you go into some of the countries in here, it's a little bit more challenging in terms of the information that you have. And traditionally what you find is that after the acquisition, after you've gone into some level of details in terms of acquiring a company, that's when you discover that a lot of the information that's been disclosed is not actually what it is. So, you know, one of the things that you go in right now as a businessman, specifically if you're looking at acquisition right now, is that you do have to classify, you know, within the 10 countries within ASEAN in here, which are the ones what you call a tier 1 in terms of disclosure, tier 2 versus tier 3. I'm not at liberty to disclose which one they are. I think roughly you would know what I'm talking about. But as a businessman going into it, it really is about doing your due diligence. And even after you do your due diligence, is doing it again and maybe 3 times over so that you know exactly what you're getting into. So, you know, in the ideal world, you would hope that basically that, you know, when you acquire a company right now, that the disclosures, the audit processes, the information that comes to it, it's really pari passu with what you encounter in here in this part of the world, in Singapore, but it is not. So one of the things that I would say that as a businessman going into it, it really is about the level of disclosures, the level of transparency, the level of accurate information right now that a company would present itself even in the country where they operate in.
Thank you. Sam, if you do.
Sure. I think just to share the experience from our clients, if you look at the challenges some of them are facing, especially investing into a big market, there's a lot of decentralization in terms of licensing is concerned. So some of them actually, if they go into the capital cities of the country to apply for business license, doesn't mean that when they go into the provinces, you know, this license will be the only license they need to start business. I think a lot of frustration on the ground that there's so many government agencies that they need to deal with in order just to get the several license. In some countries, it probably is like 7 to 12 licenses before you can start business. I think this is the real challenges that businesses are facing on the ground. That is why we are trying to see how we can actually smooth out by coordinating with the investment promotion agency in some of this licensing application. I think this is some of the very key one and real things that is happening and really giving the FDIs a lot of frustration. But having said that, I think they're still coming because they do actually see huge potential in this market. I think just to come back a bit on AEC, is it really driving the FDIs into the regions? I think from our perspective, AEC is just one of the factors. There are confluence of factors, as we have stated in our paper, that is driving the FDIs into the regions. And just purely because of the market itself, look at it, we're expecting the intra-ASEAN trade to grow from 600 billion to 1.8 trillion by 2030. And even in terms of the total trade, it's going to hit from current 2.5 to 6.6 from my estimation trillion of US dollars. That is the kind of excitement that is drawing the FDIs. I remember when we were launching the FDI centers in Indonesia. That was in 2013, when the reporters was very curious why UOB wanted to launch an FDIs during such a difficult time in Indonesia. Because in 2013, if you remember, I think it's the month of August, the rupiah actually fell very drastically, and a lot of this portfolio of FDIs was actually moving up. So the answer I've given to the reporters is, look at yourself. That's the reason why they're coming. Because if you look at, across the room, the reporters are all very young. You have the dividends, the demographic dividends to offer to all these FDIs. In fact, it's the same case if you go to Vietnam. I think these are the strong fundamentals that despite the challenges just now I mentioned, which is still ongoing, of course, financial institutions like ourselves will try to smooth out as much as possible for our customers, but there's the reality that they are facing. But the other side of the game is that they are seeing a lot of opportunities. Thanks.
Sasaki.
Yes, my biggest frustration put on existing non-tariff barrier. For example, some country cannot open the door for foreign investors for the service industries. That is very tough, and also sometimes many changes of the regulations, and that is a very tough job for our business. This is our frustrations.
Thank you. In my sort of few comments about the AEC 2025 blueprint, I said there were the unfinished business on hand, and then there are sort of new targets in terms of environmental protection and protection of labor, migrant labor, and so on. Those are new targets. But in between, there is also this emphasis in the 2025 document on trade facilitation. Mr. Sasaki, you would particularly be interested in this, being in trade. And the emphasis, the largest focus is actually on the harmonization of customs regulations and removal of technical and regulatory barriers. Well, is this a feasible objective? Because successful implementation in these two areas will require a greater participation from the CLMV countries, who are not coming on until 2018. And then when they come on too, their standards, if you like, of such disclosures may not be similar to what may exist among the ASEAN 6. And so do you think this objective can be achieved sufficiently within the next 10 years? Mr. Sasaki.
I hope so. As I mentioned, we would like to see the steady progress, like discussion ASEAN single window. So tariff elimination is one issue, and also there are some existing non-tariff barriers So newcomer countries will release such kind of barriers within next 10 years. This is my belief.
Okay, final question from up here. Final discussion point is on infrastructure development. Infrastructure is so much needed, particularly in countries such as Indonesia, of course, and Myanmar, and of course Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand generally, okay-ish, but still, there's need in Vietnam and so on. And this is more to do with the financing of infrastructure development. And Sam, this particularly, this is more your kind of baby. The needs are fantastic. McKinsey and so on have identified the large amounts of money needed. Now, what can be done? Because you talk quite bullishly about the future of ASEAN, but some countries will be left behind as the rest of ASEAN moves forward if they do not have infrastructure development. And finance is critical in infrastructure development. What can be done?
Well, if you take a look at Indonesia itself actually require about close to $500 billion of fundings over the next 4 to 5 years to build the infrastructure. I guess if you look at this country itself, they're really in need of infrastructure investment, given the fact that it's such a spread out country with 17,000 to 18,000 islands, that depending whether it's high tide or low tide. That is the reality, and that is where I think the amount of investment is required. I think the good thing is that, and also good news, I think timing is always important, that we have launched the AIIB. I think that together with the Asian Development Bank, I'm quite sure they will also be stepping up in their support to Southeast Asia country like Indonesia in meeting their infrastructure financing. Because bank alone, there's certain limitation. In fact, there's structurally, even talk about PPP is always very challenging, particularly in emerging economies where legal system is not in place yet. And also the ecosystem may not be strong enough, to support such PPP in a greater scale. Probably it's more sporadic, and that is a challenge I think the countries are facing. So I think it's important that we're also very hopeful that with AIIB coming along and ADB putting in more efforts into financing some of these projects in the emerging economies in Southeast Asia, we will see a greater improvement in terms of the whole ecosystem, particularly in helping all this emerging economies establish a local, very strong ecosystem in terms of financing. And that's where financial institutions like ourselves will be able to go in, because at the end of the day, all financial institutions are always looking at risk return. And if the risk is not, or rather the return is not palatable to the risk we are taking, things will not happen. I think that is very commercially driven.
Anything to say, Robert?
Yeah, Chairman, if I may just weigh in. I think there is a separation in terms of national infrastructure access to finance, and also the 80% of SMEs in ASEAN today that needs to have access to finance. I'm a believer that technology, particularly in the area of P2P lending and crowdfunding, is actually going to step up to the plate. It already has. I was pleasantly surprised when I was in China, just to borrow one example, that in my recent trip to China, I actually met up with a VC that's actually funded about 60,000 SMEs in China very successfully. And the way that they've done it right now is something that we hope that we can actually learn in ASEAN. I think that, the traditional banks will be having a bit of a struggle in terms of reaching out to the 80% of the SMEs, simply because of the KYC and also because of the credit scoring, that you're going to have a restriction in terms of reaching out to them. And really, it is in the area of crowdfunding and P2P lending that I think there's going to be an emergence in terms of a new industry that's actually going to happen if it has or not already basically being aggressively being pursued by some of them. So the traditional models, for example, in the US, where you have the lending club and a financial circle in UK, for example, is actually coming on stream into ASEAN. And it is my hope that at some point, that in ASEAN as well, particularly among the trade facilitation in here, that some framework could be established in order for us to really structure and to really have a framework that really governs the whole peer-to-peer lending and crowdfunding. And hopefully some ASEAN companies right now will step up to the plate and be able to be the future types of financial circles and lending club.
It'd be interesting to see whether or not those forms of financing will grow and be sustained as interest rates move. Okay, one of the causes for the existence of those sorts of financing is because of low interest rates. And it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting development. Mr. Sasaki-san.
I think there are so many business opportunity related with development of infrastructure in all Asia. And the Japanese government also very keenly support to develop infrastructure business in ASEAN countries also. So, and the other hand, China has a one belt, one road policy. This is a very strong policy and make it clear to develop infrastructure type of business in Asia and including Central Asia. So that time is we have to compete with China. This is a question. We have to collaborate. Sometimes we can collaborate with China to get the good infrastructure development. This is my personal opinion.
I would like now to invite questions from the floor. Please raise your hands, say who you're directing your question to, identify yourselves. Questions from the floor, please. So, yes, please, gentlemen.
This question is directed to the panel. My name is Adrian Villanova, a business consultant. We have been talking about AEC for some years. Now, how optimistic are you in the sense that currently, as you know, the global economy is not that good? I think basically you all know that where ASEAN countries are concerned, for example, Malaysia is very happy that China is going to invest 1 billion and rescue 1 NMB. Indonesia has got their rail. I think it's more of waiting for foreign direct investments or rather help from China and the big countries. Because within AEC, I think it will be some time before anything really practical happens. Because we have been talking about AEC for many, many years and really nothing has come about. So what is the view of the panel?
Well, it's quite a
Maybe I can.
point.
I can
Yes,
answer.
please.
Yeah. I think if you look at the components of FDI in Southeast Asia, I think 80% are actually non-ASEAN. About 20% are ASEAN. We hope that actually intra-investment in ASEAN will pick up over time as the companies, even including Singapore companies, being pushed to go more regional. I think that will help to further integrate the ASEAN economy. I have always stated that investment, when it comes in, is not just because of AEC. Like I said, there's confluence of factors. There's many things that are actually driving FDIs into this region because of the strong fundamental. I think if you look back, if you look at, despite whatever is happening now, the volatility in the global markets, you look at Vietnam this year, last year rather, first 9 months, they had 50% increase in FDIs. And Indonesia continued to attract the same amounts almost of the FDIs that they have achieved last year, the year before. So this is a very clear sign that the global investors are still focusing very much in this region. But if you look at around, what else do you have besides Southeast Asia? Where you want to go to? Okay, you're looking at the economies that is actually growing at more than 5%. Currently now, if ASEAN were a country, it will be ranked 6th largest economy. And by 2030, it's expected to reach, number 4 economies or so. So this is the type of fundamentals, I would say, that will continue to drive FDI into regions. In fact, our economies have projected that if you look at the current FDI stock in ASEAN, it's about 1.8 trillion US dollars. And we are projecting that by 2030, it will reach about 5 over trillion US dollars. So I guess AEC definitely is not the only factors. But AEC is important because ASEANs, if they are more integrated, they will be more competitive. They will be able to compete with more other emerging economies like China, India. So it's good things to have, but it will take time.
Thank you for that question. I'm just going to answer in 2 sentences. Last month, I was actually approached by AIIB to do project financing for one of my companies. It's in the area of installation of solar energy, up to the megawatts that we're putting out. I've never been approached by the AEC. Does it even exist?
My answer is economically, AEC will increase employment and increase the business opportunities. And politically, AEC will enhance comprehensive negotiation ability against China.
Right. Any further questions, please? Mike, please. No one around.
Hello.
Coming, it's coming.
It's my short question. My name is Masashi Nishihara from Japan. What's the impact of TPP on the AEC? It will increase the hard competitivity of AEC, or would it tend to divide members of AEC? Thank you.
What is the impact between TPP and AEC? AEC, TPP and AEC, what's the difference?
I mean, any member of the panel? Impact of the AEC on the TPP, right?
Right.
Yeah.
The other way around.
Okay. Impact of the TPP on the AEC.
If you,
Anyone wants to have a bash at it?
That is very good questions. In fact, this day we're not just looking at one economic policies, not just one AEC. In fact, you even have to take into considerations of OBOR, take into consideration of TPP, RCEP. This is very important because these are all driving FDIs around the regions. And you look at TPP, particularly Vietnam, very interesting case. We have been observing this market last year was so quiet in terms of FDIs 3 years ago. But over the last 12 months, what happens? Huge amount of investment have been pouring into Vietnam. So, and we also see that a lot of companies taking advantage of this TPP. Take, for example, my real-life experience. The night after US have declared that the negotiation of TPP concluded, next day I received a call from Indonesia, our clients, is looking at, can you help me to acquire companies in Vietnam? I'm in the government business. You see that because Vietnam is part of the TPP participating. That could be one of the reasons, one of the factors. So this actually, if you ask me, are very complementary. And of course, most recently, you see more ASEAN countries voicing that they're interested in participating in TPP. If you ask me, this is good news. Because TPP is high standard trade agreements. If the ASEAN country is prepared to put in the effort to comply with TPP, I think AEC will have hope. This is my take.
I think, if I may, I think the AEC states, it is stated quite categorically, ASEAN practices open regionalism, okay? It would relate to people outside the region, not be exclusive, and it'll be competitive with the rest of the world. So in principle, to begin with, there is no necessary conflict. However, it must be borne in mind that in the TPP agreement itself, there are provisions that say that TPP requirements do not clash, do not have precedence over existing arrangements that may exist among the new TPP members. And therefore, there is a carve-out of whatever obligations that ASEAN members who are members of TPP will have with the TPP. And then, of course, thirdly, the TPP is more comprehensive than the AEC. It is more binding. It is not just about trade, it's about behavioral patterns, about transparency and so on, which will enhance those levels of transparency among the members of ASEAN who are members of the TPP. And it will give them the opportunity for the 40% of GDP of the TPP member states. And in Malaysia's case, for example, you have 4 new markets that Malaysia can reach, particularly the US market. And it is important it is beneficial for Malaysia. And fifthly, I think the TPP is not going to be the only extra AEC arrangement that would exist in the future. We are talking about FTAAP already, and there will be sort of rejigging and realignments. We're also talking, we are talking about ASEAN-EU free trade area. There's going to be alignments as well. So these things are dynamic, and they will have to be taken in the stride, and superficially appearing conflicts there will be, but companies will align, countries will realign, and provisions will make it possible for them to do so. We do have, yes, please.
Yeah, my name is Ernesto Bruin. I'm with the Netherlands Embassy here. I hear a lot of good analysis. It's quite refreshing and a lot of hope. I think the moderator asked the right question. What are your frustrations? But one thing is to voice frustrations and what problems there are, but I think the second step would be to operationalize those, to see how you can get rid of those barriers, non-tariff barriers or tariff barriers. Within Europe, we've seen that the big push for the single European market in 1992 came from the business community as a response to the rise of Japan, competition from Japan and from the US. So my question would be particularly to Singapore business leaders, is what currently is the business community in ASEAN, in Singapore, or maybe across borders, doing to influence political decision makers or governments to reduce barriers, to really make an effort to come to integration and to make a real ASEAN economic community. I think often the business community underestimates its own impact, its own influence. So what can the business community itself do, except for taking advantage now of what is already happening, but to really make a big push for an integrated ASEAN economic community?
Please. I think we're beginning to run out of time. What I'll do is I'll give all 3 panelists an opportunity to answer that question and say some final remarks if they wish, starting with Mr. Sasaki. Mr. Sasaki, you got, yeah.
What comment?
Sorry?
So I don't understand his question. Well,
You start then, Robert.
what I have to say?
Yeah, you start.
Can I jump in and help my colleague out? I think your question was that what are the business leaders doing, at least here in Singapore and also in ASEAN right now, that really is bringing in the whole harmony and the whole benefits as we stick together as an ASEAN community, if I hear you correct, right? I think speaking in terms of my involvement within the ASEAN Business Council, there is a lot of dialogue in terms of how do we actually work together as business leaders? How do we do the whole establishment in terms of exchange of information, infrastructure, and how do we actually move the needle in terms of actually getting that we are in a better place than we are here today? And one of the things that I think that we can work together within ASEAN here is the whole harmonization and standardization right now in terms of information exchange cross-border. The systems that we've built over the last 20 years are really archaic, and it needs to be addressed, including here in Singapore. So in Singapore, we have a system that's called TradeNet. It's 20 years old. It's due basically for renewal. In Malaysia, you have a system that's called DagangNet. And one of the things that ASEAN is now actually trying to achieve is actually to harmonize the whole customs declaration and clearance system in here so that we have an ASEAN single window, single view in terms of information right now being exchanged, and to ensure that the whole efficiency and whole data coupling right now that ensures that everybody has the same information on hand that is consistent cross-border in here is being addressed. But having said that, there's some ways to go. The intention is there, the desire is there, but now really is a push factor that all the 10 countries can come together to really move the needle on this one in here. And having said that, among the 10 countries in here, from a technology perspective, not all countries are the same level playing field. So there is basic give and take on all ends.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that answer. I think, do you want to have a final word? No. I think we've come to 30. We exceeded our time by about 44 seconds. So we have to wind up and not hold you back from lunch. But before you go to lunch, please join me in expressing our thanks to the panel speakers. Thank you.